Welcome back to another episode of The High Ticket Woman. Today, I have a very special guest with me, and I'm not going to introduce anything about her because I do not want to give away this powerful story that she has to share with us. Lisa, welcome to The High Ticket Woman.
Well, thank you for having me, Debbie.
Let's just jump right in and talk about why you are on this mission to go out and tell your story.
Okay. Well, I am a widow and I've been a widow for almost 6 years. And what happened to me around year two is I felt a calling on my heart to be an advocate for widows and widowers and help them heal. And so that's what I do. I have a widows ministry and I wanted to talk to you today because I wanted to be able to give some married people some ideas on how they can love their spouse when they're gone, because inevitably one of you is going to die. And there are some things that you can have in place that will help you continue it to love the person left behind, because that, as you can imagine, is a grand, terrible adventure.
Yeah. Let's go back and let's talk about your own story, and your marriage and your husband's death, if you don't mind sharing that.
Sure. So I met Eric Woolery when I was 14,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was a special event at church for youth group where they were introducing the soon to be high school kids into the high school group, and it was at a church in Orange County, California, where I grew up. And we were all going to a baseball game, and so my husband, Eric Woolery, was going to be a senior, and so he was really cool, and he was there being really cool with all his friends, and then I showed up and didn't fall for the cool, but, grinned at him and got my way right onto the back bench of the bus and right in between my husband and another senior, and, that it was love at first sight. So I was 14 and he was 17, and we hung out in the same group for a long time at church, and then we dated off and on, and then finally when I was 19, we got engaged and then married when I was 22 because my parents said that I couldn't get married until I graduated from college. So, in my kind of fashion, I graduated on Sunday and got married on Saturday. So
You're gonna let any grass grow under your feet.
nope. And so we had a great love story. We are married 28 years
Wow.
and we have two kids. When he died, they were 10 and 12. And he just came home from work one day and went into his home office. I greeted him at the door and gave him a kiss because I still loved him. And he said, I have so much to tell you about my day. And he looked so handsome and he was like glowing. And he said, I have some stuff to do in my office and then I'll tell you. And I said, okay. And then I went to make dinner and he died while I was chopping broccoli. Um, I became aware that I didn't hear him on the phone anymore while I was in the kitchen, and I thought he was just doing emails. So I went to go tell him a joke, which was, "You're gonna fall asleep during dinner because we're having broccoli and chicken because we were dieting." And I opened the door and I saw him leaning funny. My first thought was that he was, fiddling with the cords under the desk, but then my second thought was he was playing a joke on me because he was leaning so weird, and then I realized that he was dead, and so I grabbed his cell phone and called 911, and I had to the 911 operator said I had to push him out of his chair, and I learned what dead weight means, and, roll him over and do chest compressions, which I did until the paramedics arrived, and then they were not able to revive him, and he just had a heart attack suddenly. He was very healthy. He was at a healthy weight. I mean, even though we were dieting, he was not unhealthy at all, and it was just very sudden, and he had actually just had a a physical, and he was, declared healthy.
I mean, obviously, you've told this story many times in the last 6 years, but I'm trying to imagine what it would have been like to come into the room and see your husband slumped over, and the myriad of thoughts that go through your head, and then sort of that jolt of adrenaline of, you have to do something. It had to have been a very scary moment for you.
Well, it was, like, when I picked up his phone to call 911, like, I screamed into the phone, "I think my husband is dead," and I could tell that he was dead because his face was starting to get a little purple, and then when the 911 operator said I had to do chest compressions, I yelled, "No," like, "I don't know how I can, like, I don't know how I can get him on the floor," and and then I just went on autopilot, just because I kind of had to. I think it was a way to protect myself, but then when the paramedics came, like, I ran out and flagged him down, and then I ran back in and was doing chest compressions again, and then, like, the first thoughts that came into my mind when they came in and sorta, like, gently pushed me out of the room was, "What about the kids?" The kids were actually swimming at a friend's house down the street, so I called my neighbor, and I think I was incoherent. The battalion chief was there, he took the phone and arranged, and then there was, a policeman there who went to their house and, like, got the kids, like, secured into the basement where they watched TV and had chicken McNuggets, and then I remember then taking the phone and calling Uncle Larry and Aunt Chu, who live 45 minutes away. They're actually retired firefighter paramedics, and I was, like, screaming into the phone, incoherent. The battalion chief again took the phone and talk to them, and then again to my best friend who lives in Phoenix. I live in Kansas City, and I just remember, like, all of this stuff going on, and it was like everything was happening in, like, fast motion, but I felt like I was moving in slow motion, and I waited 40 minutes for them to revive him, which they couldn't, and it's like, how long was that? It was no time and so long all at once. And then I was just on autopilot for a long time.
A long time, yeah. So, I think so many people when they go through something unexpected like this, their brain does sort of go on autopilot. There's a shock that sets in.
Yeah, I didn't really think for myself about things. Like, my best friend came, which, by the way, she was at my house in 5 hours, like,
Mm.
not knowing anything. And then she came and then she stayed for 2 weeks, and, like, she really had to do everything for me, like, plan the funeral, and she kinda got me started on, like, paperwork and stuff, and then another good friend came and stayed for 2 more weeks and helped me. So, yeah, I just kinda did what they said, and then when they left, I had to keep doing all my things because I had a 10 and 12-year-old, which is horrible, but also was great because it did keep me going, and, like, I couldn't lay in bed and drink my husband's favorite bourbon all day. Like, I had to get up and
You had to
get
go
the
through the
kids ready for
motions.
school, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. How long did it take for you to just the realization, I think it takes a while. I always tell people who are grieving something that first year is a year of firsts because you're going to go through holidays and special occasions, but even beyond that, just the first time you wake up alone without that person, the first time that do something with the kids and they're not there, the first time that you have your routines and your habits. What was that year of firsts like for you?
Well, devastating, but also I was deep in widow's fog, so I didn't really feel everything, and I remember just wanting that first year to be over, because I hated the look on people's faces when they'd say, "Oh, when did your husband die?" "Oh, 2 months ago," or 2 weeks ago, or whatever. I just wanted it to be more than a year, and I wanted those firsts to be done. I thought a lot about the firsts, and I just wanted to be in a place of normalcy again, and I have to say that, everyone, like, a lot of people say the second year is worse than the first. I don't think so. But I think also it is different for everybody, but I still, I'll be at my best friend's house or I'll be doing something, and then I'll be like, "Oh my gosh, Eric is dead." And he's been dead for almost 6 years, and I'm still in shock about it. It's not like that doesn't mean that I'm not functioning normally or that I'm not or that I'm not, laying in bed or depressed or anything, but I still feel that shock every now and then because he was such a part of my life. Like, I was never an adult without him. Like, I grew up he's so intermingled with me that it's still very shocking.
You talk about widow's fog, and that's a term I've actually never heard before. Can you talk a little bit more about what that was for you?
Well, a lot of people talk about widow's fog, and that's just sort of like you're confused and you're in like a fog. So you don't remember, like, maybe that you already called this person or that person, or you're not able to recall the details of a meeting, especially when it pertains to the death. So you might forget, like, what happened at the Social Security office, or you might be confused because you're in such a state of shock, but also you're doing all these things that you've never done before. And then you might be doing them like you might not be a financial person and maybe your husband did all your finances. So you're trying to figure that out. And then you're also you're just trying to figure out how to pay your bills online, maybe, but then you're also having to do it for the first time and not really sort of in the zone of the finances or whatever it is. So it's just, I think, shock and confusion.
Yeah, and you talked about people coming up and people don't a lot of people don't know how to handle grief, right? They don't know what
Hardly
they
anybody
don't
does.
yeah, they don't know what to say to you. So, what was that like for you? Because I can imagine, yeah, you might have gotten through most of that in a year, but there's still that odd person that, hasn't seen you in X number of years and they never heard that Eric died. And sometimes it's not just death, sometimes it's divorce too. This sort of the same thing can kinda happen, but what was that like for you? How did you deal with other people not knowing how to handle your loss?
Well, I just tried to be graceful because, really, even now today, I don't really even know how to deal with someone's grief, even though I have dealt with it myself. So people say odd and awful things like, "Oh, he's in a better place," or these kinds of things, and they don't know what to say. And 99% of people are trying to say something from their heart. They just don't know what to say. And as the widow, I can be feeling a million different ways on that day. So even if somebody says something that on one day it wouldn't bother me and then another day it does, that's not really their fault.
Right.
It's it's the way I received it. So I just try to be graceful and say thank you.
Is there if you were to give people any sort of, like, counsel or advice on how to handle someone else's grief, what would you say to them?
Well, I mean, I like it when people give me a hug and say I'm thinking about you today.
Yeah.
Or how are you doing today? Not just how are you? Um,
How are you doing in this moment?
yeah, yes. But really, I want people to treat me normal. Like,
Ah,
don't just just walk up to me and say, you know, nice day, isn't it? Or I don't know, like after church, nice service. Or if I run into someone at the mall, oh hey, what are you buying? Just treat me normal. don't feel like you've got to tiptoe and because I don't really want to talk about it in every moment. So if I see you at the grocery store, you don't have to remind me that my husband is dead. You can just ask me if I like tomato soup. And then later we can get into that if we start talking more.
And that's really up to you, isn't it? I mean, it's your story and you decide if and when you wanna share it. I think maybe the best gift anybody can give someone who's grieving is just to listen if that person wants to talk and to give them comfort and let them know that they're loved and supported and that they're there for them in whatever way. Would you agree, or is there something more that you would pass on to people?
I agree. And if you feel like you really want to let them know that you are thinking about them, then just say, I've been thinking about you a lot.
Yeah, just say it, yeah.
Yeah. And then I know you might ask me this about like what you can do for a widow. I have some
Well
ideas on that.
well, so I thank you for that because I wanted to transition into the fact that you actually you wrote a book. It's called The Widow's Comeback. So, at what point in your grieving journey did you decide that you wanted to do that, to turn your story into a book and have it published?
Well, I just started writing. So I used to have a blog. It was called My California Exodus because we had actually just moved to Kansas City from Southern California 8 months before. And Kansas City was my husband's hometown. He moved away when he was a junior in high school and then moved to Southern California his junior year. And so I was writing already on my blog. And then like a lot of people wanted to know what happened. And so I decided that I would sit down and that it might make me feel better to just sit down and write what happened. So I did, and then I put it up on my blog so I didn't have to explain it 397 more times. So so I just be like, well, it's on my blog and
Go read that.
exactly. And then I just started writing my blog every week and during my first year my first 8 or 9 months, I would have the kids like, I made them invite a friend over every, uh, Friday night for a slumber party, and then I would sometimes I'd have a friend over, sometimes I would just write, have, like, a glass of wine, and I would just say how we were dealing with grief, like, "What happened in the week? What are my observations?" And so I had, like, a pretty good catalog of blogs
Yeah.
going. And then I went to a yoga memoir retreat just because I wanted to go and I really liked this author. And she kind of got me thinking, oh, maybe I could write a memoir. And around this time also, my aunt was encouraging me. And then at church, I went and asked if there was a widows group and there wasn't. And some like snarky, irritating person at the welcome table like, why don't you start a widows group? And that, of course, made me so mad because I'm like, no, I'm the one who needs the ministering to right now. But that sort of planted this little seed in my heart, which like just grew to like, I want to help widows. And then I wanted a mentor so bad. I was 50 when Eric died. And, you know, most widows are much older. And I had like still kids in elementary and middle school and I didn't feel like there was anyone like me. And so I looked for memoirs, but I felt like the memoirs didn't really tell like the hot mess of it. It was just too, I don't really know the word, but I didn't feel like it was the truth. So all of those things kind of all came together and I decided that I would I would take some of those blog posts and then I would also write some of my very lowest points, my most like the lowest points of my life and add them because it didn't seem to be okay to be a widow with kids and mess up. Like I felt like I had to be perfect. And when I wasn't being perfect, I felt a lot of judgment, and that may have just been completely myself feeling it, but, people have a lot of opinions that they feel like they want to share and a lot of things that they thought I should and shouldn't be doing. And who are they to tell me this? Because none of them were widows. So that's why I wrote the book. And on the
So
cover, oh, sorry.
no, go ahead. Go ahead,
On the
please.
cover, I wrote, "What if you knew you'd be okay?" Because that's how I felt. I was like, "Am I gonna be okay? Am I yeah, am I gonna be able to be enough for my kids? Am I gonna be able to have a happy life? Am I gonna ever be okay?"
So out of that was really born this ministry for working with widowed people. Now, I know that you a lot some of what you do, or even a lot of what you do, is sort of really to help prepare people for the possibility, especially around the financial end of things, prepare people for the possibility that the unexpected can happen. Before we talk about that, was that something that you personally experienced? I mean, as you were having to go through we had an unexpected death in my family, and that was one of the sort of dominant things that came out of it was all the paperwork and getting the death certificate and finding out and not having passwords to, different accounts and can't even log into the computer or, get into the safe and all those day-to-day frustrating things that you don't even think about when your partner is alive. And now all of a sudden I mean, just the number of people that won't talk to you, banks and lawyers, credit card companies, they won't talk to you if you don't have a death certificate or you don't have a, if you're not the executor of the will, so many of those details. So, what happened with you in those early days after Eric died? Because I know this is something you help people with.
Yes, well, I'm just gonna say this, yes, to all of what you just said.
Believe me, people, if you ever have gone through this, it is the most maddening, horrible experience so I can only imagine what you went through, Lisa.
Yes, well, luckily, I did the family bills. So, I knew the password to, like, our joint accounts and all of this. Um, I when we moved to Kansas City, I had just quit my corporate job. So, we had only one income, and I had just had this big princess 50-year-old birthday celebration where I went to Italy and spent a lot of money. So, we had $7,000 in our joint checking account. We had plenty of funds elsewhere, but in the joint checking account, that's all we had. And then my husband's death certificate was delayed because of an investigation and also a shortage at the coroner's office of people to do autopsies. But they also had to send out for tests because he died under like not normal circumstances. I guess, he like didn't have cancer or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so here I was, no job, two kids, a mortgage, and $7,000. So, all of our assets at a certain bank were frozen because they in Kansas didn't understand California banking laws where it was joint, but it didn't look the same. So they just froze it. We're like, we're just freezing this for your own protection. Which, like, I was in such widow's fog. I said, okay, and walked out of the bank. Like, if that were to happen to me right now, I'd be like, But
Yeah.
when you're like dealing with all this, I was like, oh. And then other assets were frozen because I didn't have the death certificate. I wasn't able to access any of our 2 life insurance policies until I had the death certificate. So I didn't have any money. So I had to do things like sell my I had a Porsche 911, like a little princess car.
Nice.
Yeah, and so I sold that. I sold my husband's gun collection. I thought I might have to cash out like a 401k. And then so I was, like, broke and grieving, but almost being broke sorta gave me something else to obsess about,
The
and
focus on them.
yeah, so
So what do you recommend then to people? You've walked through this. You've traveled this path. What do you recommend to couples who Your spouse is still alive, but to be able to put things in order to prepare for the possibility that something like this could happen. Are there some key things that you recommend people do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, first of all, have as many things joint as possible, like your electric bill, like your electricity account, your cars, joint owns, joint on your phone bill. I mean, I had Verizon suing my husband 3 years after he died because they wouldn't let me pay his bill because I wasn't him.
It's so crazy the way these things are set up. It's
Yes.
so maddening. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So just as many things as you can do jointly because that will save the surviving spouse a lot of heartache and tears. I would also say that for sure get life insurance. And I would say like most of us are on the track of one or two of us working and we have a 401k. So I would say go meet your advisor or get an
Mhm,
advisor and sit down and do a little planning. How much am I going to need for life insurance, for college or whatever?
mhm,
Like just like sit down with a professional and like actually visit this. And then of course you should have a trust, but like my husband and I hadn't we had our trust half done and we never finished it because we couldn't decide who we wanted our kids to go with. But actually, it turned out to be lucky for me that we didn't have a trust because then I would have had to pay his $250,000 small business loan. But as it was, Kansas is not a community property state. And so he had the loan all by himself. And then I didn't have to pay it, and which coincidentally was my job to get, like, an insurance policy on that, and I just hadn't done it yet. But generally, do everything jointly because then it just seamlessly flows, and then talk about it. Like
talk about I was gonna say, probably communication really plays a lot in
yeah.
preparing for these kinds of things, yeah.
So you should have I mean, it's good financial practice to go and see your advisor every year anyways, but maybe make that the day that you go out to dinner afterwards and just talk about what you learned at the financial advisor's office and then just talk about like, okay, if I die, then, things, just talk about things. Like even
Things that
Google
people don't
questions.
wanna people think things that sometimes when I do bring stuff like this up with my husband, he's like, "That's morbid," but, I mean, these are important conversations to have.
They are, and
People don't like to have them, though.
well, and, like, for someone who like, for your husband who says that's morbid, be like, "Well, maybe it is, but someday I might be your widow and I need to know some things." Yeah,
Yeah.
this is a way for us to love each other. Like, I'm not saying do it on Valentine's Day,
Yeah.
but you should do it, and just to get away from finances for a second, I wish that my husband and I would have talked about whether or not we wish the other to date again and have a relationship again. One of the things, the non financial things that I struggled with is I started to date and then I started to feel like Eric might not want me to date. And then I came to the realization, well, like my vows ended when he died, but like still, how does he feel? And I'm like, well, I don't,
Yeah.
does he even feel anymore? But then, like,
Yeah.
I had to come to terms with that I had to feel okay with it, not him because he's gone. So so that's like a really awesome thing to just get out there on the table, and I'd say, like, everyone is gonna say yes, but if you've heard him say yes or her say yes, then it's just gonna make it a little easier for you when you decide that you wanna date again, if you decide you do.
I was sitting here thinking, what if your spouse says no?
Well,
And now what? Are you gonna feel sort of obligated the rest of your life to stay single?
well,
But I think probably nobody's gonna say no,
yeah,
right?
I can't imagine anybody saying that. If they
Yeah.
are, like, just
Yeah.
red flag, they're kind of a jerk.
Yeah, but going back to the
Yeah.
money part, so many people these days now, they have a lot of debt. How does debt impact the surviving spouse, or does it?
Oh, well, it depends on how that debt is. Like I just told you, the business loan I didn't have to pay off, but again, I was in Kansas, which is not community property. Had I been in a community property state, I would have been responsible for it.
So it
So,
really depends on where you live too, just
well,
like
yeah,
different areas, yeah.
and, like, you shouldn't be in debt anyways. Like, so
Sure,
so
that's the ideal.
yeah, that is the ideal, and so, like, I think that my advice on being in debt for after your spouse dies is the same as if your spouse is alive. Like, don't go into debt because you wanna buy, like, a Louis Vuitton bag. Go into debt for reasons that are very difficult and that you don't really want to. Because when one spouse dies and then the other is left, like, I was lucky because the only debt we had was the house, which the insurance paid off, and then this business loan that I didn't have to pay. But I wanted like, I could have gone back into the workforce and been fine. I mean, I was fine anyways, but after we got through that hump of the death certificate, but your spouse might need to be home with the kids. Like, I made goals with my kids, and I said, "This is what's gonna drive our decisions. 1, let's try to stay in this house because there's stability here. And 2, because my son came to me literally the night my husband died and said, "Do you have to go back to work?" Like, he was stressed about that, and so I possibly lied to him and said no. But I wanted to have the time with my kids to have flexibility and be able to be a better mom because I could be around more because they didn't have a dad anymore and I didn't have a husband for help. So, that all goes back to being in debt. Like, if you die with a lot of debt, then your spouse could be in a position where they're not going to have as easy of a life for themselves and or for your kids.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're talking about something else that's really important, which is when you have children at any age and you lose your spouse, you have a responsibility to them. What was that? I mean, you're in this widow's fog, you're grieving the loss of your husband. It's so unexpected, but you still are a mom and you're having to deal with your children's grief too. What do you want to share with listeners about that aspect of all this? Because that's a huge piece of this.
Well, I think that being a widow made me a better mom in some ways because I brought the kids into my realm in a vulnerable way. So, for example, the first thing that I did in this capacity was I was exhausted by 8 o'clock. And I'm an introvert, so I need, like, some time. So I told the kids that mommy needs to close my door at 8 o'clock, and I need to take a bath, and I need to relax. So here's your choice. You can go to bed, like, I can tuck you in at 7:45 and you can read in your bed, or you can tuck each other in at 8:45. So they chose to tuck each other in. And so right, I know. But but that was actually kinda cool because it gave them the opportunity to do for each other, and it also let them make the choice,
Yeah,
and it
and
also gave
Manny
me
here on time for about
yes,
45 minutes.
and it gave me the capacity to
Mhm.
because I just needed a break because like,
Yeah,
by that time, I was finding that I was losing my temper and or,
yeah.
like, I was just too exhausted to do anything anymore at that time, and and the other thing that I did early on was I told my kids we were selling my husband's car, and my son was just upset about it and said, "No, dad said I could have the car when I was 16." And I said, "Well, let's go back to our goals. Like, what if you knew that this goal or selling the car meant that, like, it would be easier for me to stay home and to keep the house?" And so he said, "Okay." So before that, I probably would have just said, "Well, we're selling the car because we are, and I'm the mom, and you're gonna
So
say
that's
yes
how it
to yes."
is.
Yeah. So, and then even, like, I'll give you an example from last summer. So we moved houses, and they're teenagers now. So at the time, they were 15 and 17, and we were having some kind of an argument about something, and they weren't being awesome about something. And so I said I don't even remember what it was. And so I said, "Well, you guys, like, you've got me. Like, that's it. We don't have dad as a fallback. And so if you get into trouble, I'm going to do my best, but it's only me. And I'm really sorry that you don't get to be like a teenager that has their angst and gets to be naughty and all of this stuff. But we don't have a dad and you need to do better. And they just kind of sat there for a minute and they said, okay. And then they were. So by not having a spouse to like back me up, I then just was more vulnerable and got their back up. So that was interesting.
Lisa, that actually is really moving. I mean, like, I'm feeling emotion listening to you talk about that because you took this very, very traumatic event and you turned it into a positive for you and your children. And it sounds like you are so much more bonded and connected to each other because you allowed yourself to be vulnerable, but you also set some really healthy boundaries. So the kids have that incredible example now that you set for them on self-care. That's phenomenal. Wow. Okay, well, Lisa, we're coming to an end here, but if there's one last thing that you wanna share with people, I mean, obviously, we'll tell them how to reach you to get more, but one last tip or insight or piece of advice that in any capacity would help people to really sort of jar them out of that autopilot mode that so many of us are in and make us stop and think, there, if not today, then when? What would that be?
Yeah. Well, when you are the spouse that's left behind, it is so hard. Like you don't have the capacity at this point to understand how
Yeah.
difficult it is. So whatever you can do as far as planning with your spouse, do it because that is how you love your spouse today, but also when you're gone.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Lisa, so much. Everybody, that this is Lisa Woolery, and her website is thewidowscomeback.com. So you can reach out to her for more amazing tips and tools on just how to navigate, if you are a widow, how to navigate that grief journey, or to, get insight on how to plan and prepare for the untimely death of your spouse. And we'll put that website in the show notes for today. So everybody, thank you so much for just tuning in today to the High Ticket Woman. I want to say that if this episode really resonated with you, then reach out. Reach out to Lisa or reach out to me because maybe it's time to act, right? Healing and growth are completely possible. And whether you are healing from the death of somebody or you're healing from something else traumatic that's going on in your life, like divorce, you're only going to heal if you are willing to do the work. So head over to the show notes. You can reach out to Lisa, or you can explore one of my two courses, Beauty from Ashes and The Path Less Traveled. Those are courses I created specifically for you to help you take the next step towards the relationship and the life that you are created for. Don't forget to subscribe and please share this with a friend, especially if it resonated with you. And always stay committed to becoming all that God designed for you to be.